Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to the Merryn Talks Money Weekly Roundup, our debrief on the biggest stories in markets and economics. When I say the biggest stories, I mean the big story today. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb, editor-at-large for Bloomberg UK Wealth.
And I'm John Stepek, author of the Money Distilled newsletter and senior reporter for Bloomberg.
Wonderful. Nice to talk to you, John, because this is such I was going to say exciting day, I was going to say great day. It's none of those things. It's none of those things. We had to listen to Rachel Reeves yesterday. Poor Rachel, as she's going to be known from now. Actually, no, we're going to upgrade that. Poor Rachel. Poor Rachel. Poor Rachel. So spring statement yesterday, that went badly, didn't it?
Probably the spring statement is that Rachel Reeves was going into it. What had happened was that growth was weaker than she expected and interest rates were higher than she expected. So the tiny rounding error of headroom in her made-up fiscal rules had completely gone. So she was going to need to find more money somewhere down the back of the sofa.
Before we go any further, just explain to our irritable listeners, I'm assuming everyone's irritable at this point, why this headroom nonsense exists, why it is that what is a rounding error in the great scheme of our spending and our debt is so crucially important, and also how it can be that she used to have headroom, as she called it, fiscal headroom of 9.9 billion, and then she fiddled some numbers yesterday, and now she's got headroom of 9.9 billion again, the same number. Which sort of tells you that everything's a pile of nonsense. What is this all about?
Look, it's basically made up. So what happened after the financial crisis? Well, this is my view. Not everyone would agree. In fact, I had a disagreement with Stephanie Flanders on Bloomberg TV yesterday about this. But basically, the Office for Budget Responsibility was set up by George Osborne when the Tories came into, sorry, not the Tories, the coalition government came into power in 2010. And that was meant to be a sort of fiscal watchdog. So it was meant to make sure that the future government did not blow the budget. And certainly as far as I'm concerned, there was a purely cynical political move to basically create a scorched earth world in which Labour would be saddled with problems in the future. And any other kind of future government that wanted to spend, you were going to lock in this kind of, I guess, fiscal discipline, for want of a better word. And instead what happened is it got this almost religious totemic significance. And now pretty much everything has to be run past the OBR. And if the OBR doesn't like it, politicians panic about it. And this obviously became much worse after the Liz Truss experience, which, as I've said over and over again, we took completely the wrong lesson from that. What happened with Liz Truss in 2022 is not that she didn't get the OBR to mark her homework, it's that she and Kwasi Kwarteng talked very aggressively and carelessly, recklessly, but they were doing it when the gilt market was about to fall over because of a completely separate issue. So what's come out of that is that it suddenly looks as if the OBR and this all these made up sums actually matter. They don't matter. What would matter is a government telling a good story, a government looking as if it's got a decent plan for growth, a government looking as if it's not going to kind of, just go wild on the spending. But the problem is that we've now got this kind of fake decimal point system.
Yeah, whenever you see a decimal point, there's a problem, right? So two things to say there. Two immediate thoughts. The first is that isn't it amazing how the British can make a religion out of anything except for actual religion?
Yes.
NHS, OBR, whatever. Send in your list of things that you can... Paddington. Anything.
Blessed be his marmalade sandwiches.
The other is that this OBR nonsense, what it does is it puts us automatically in danger because it kind of anchors the bond market, right?
So the OBR anchors the bond market.
Yeah, I mean, not anchors, but it provides something for the bond market to react against.
It does, actually. You're right. I mean, the thing is, you didn't have this number before, and suddenly you've got this number, and the bond market can sit there and kind of panic off the back of it. But the problem with the fake sort of detail, the fake accuracy, the fake precision, is that what it creates is... it creates a hostage to fortune, but also it creates this weird world where a government and a Chancellor and the Treasury in particular are just running around trying to find a million here, a theoretical million here and a million there to shave a bit off. Because as you said, it's like the tell here is the fact that she had 9.9 billion after the autumn budget. She lost that and now she's managed to get it back to 9.9 billion somehow. Is this kind of precision? And the fact that she was running around after the kind of benefit, the reductions in the increase in real terms of spending on welfare had been announced. Because I think that's really important. It's like, this is not austerity by anyone's definition.
It's nothing.
Instead of going up by 1% in real terms, it's going up by something like 0.5%. Now, the point is it's still going up in real terms.
It's still going up. That's exactly the key. This is not austerity. Nothing is being cut here. We're just saying maybe fewer people could claim this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that it's endlessly frustrating. So we've got, like I said, we've got fake precision. Everyone knows that the OBR's forecasts are wrong. That's not because the OBR is particularly stupid or bad at economics. It's because no one can predict what's going to happen next. Also, everyone keeps talking about how uncertain things are at the moment. And I think that's actually fair to say. I think things are unusually certain. They are unusually dependent on kind of big changes in the way that politicians are treating economics and economies in general, so that things are probably more uncertain than they were in maybe the early 2000s generally in terms of the way things are going. But the point is that no one then seems to, we still kid on that these numbers have some kind of meaning or some kind of significance behind them. And what we should do is have a somewhat more relaxed system where the government says, right, we're going to try this, I'm going to try that. And if it's not working, then we're going to change tack. But we shouldn't be sitting around trying to measure exactly what's going to happen with each of these things, especially whenever the OBR or certainly a lot of the elements don't take into account things like behavioural changes. And of course, lots of tax moves and benefit moves are designed to drive behavioural changes. The other false precision thing is where they start talking about, all right, well, these cuts are going to drive, another 50,000 kids into poverty. And you're kind of like, well, how do you say that with any conviction, quite apart from what is your definition of poverty, because it's not the normal human being's definition of poverty. The point is, you don't know what these numbers are. The point is, if people go off these benefits but then get a job, that's not going to increase the poverty numbers. There was a Bloomberg article which kind of helped this go viral, which pointed out that 1 in 5 new cars in Britain is basically purchased with a PIP. You kind of know the personal independence payment. And of course, everyone's sort of looking at this and saying, well, wait a minute, this thing isn't even means tested, and you can get it by kind of jumping through enough hoops to say that you have one of these very poorly defined ADHD type illnesses. This is not a criticism of anyone who's got mental health issues. I'm very, very sympathetic to that. But it's clearly the size and the scale shows that there's skewed incentives at work here.
I think the Motability thing was really interesting. We talked about this briefly before, but it was a sort of cut-through moment, wasn't it? When suddenly all sorts of people went, I wondered how my neighbours always manage to have a brand new car every 3 years when I have never in my whole life had a brand new car, despite the fact that I've worked my whole life. I always thought it was weird, and now I get it. It feels like a bit of a sea change in the way, sea change might be pushing it, but a cut through moment in the way that working people, not all working people, because obviously a lot of people on PIPs also work, but a way that those who finance the welfare state might look at the welfare state. And I suppose that's kind of a lot of what's happening here, is that what Rachel Reeves, poor dear, and the people around her are beginning to have to accept is that the UK has reached the limit of the size of state that the private sector can support. That there comes a point when it's just enough. And we've got the tax burden going up to historically high levels, on its way to nearly 38% by 27-28. We've got our debt levels at 100%-ish of GDP. We now have worse debt levels than pretty much anywhere in Europe, which is deeply embarrassing, got to say.
Not worse than France or Italy.
Okay, fine. But across the EU, the EU, we're on 100, they're on about 80 across the EU. On average, our debt has gone up 15-16% since 2019. Across the EU, it's gone up more like 4-5%. So even relative to the EU, which people always look over and go, we're looking pretty awful. We're up against the limit of what the private sector can afford. And of course, that is what happened in the US as well. I mean, there's a reason, we've talked about this before, that Trump is not a cause of lots of things that are happening in America. Trump is a symptom. Yeah. And a lot of things that he's doing are symptoms of the conditions that already exist. So the Department of Government Spending, DOGE, expenditure in the US, didn't come out of the blue. That's a direct result of the unsustainability of the US government debt level, a direct result. And here we are now in the UK. We are in exactly the same position. And if Rachel Reeves isn't going to be Elon Musk, somebody else has to be Elon Musk. right? And she's not going to be Elon Musk. She's not up to the job. So Labour are going to be in the very bizarre position by the end of the era having to hire an Elon, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the problem, though, isn't it? Because you've got, like, Rachel on the one hand is arguably the toughest talker on all this stuff in the party. And everyone else is kind of like clamouring to have things like wealth taxes and complaining that, you know, kind of trimming the kind of benefits bill is in some way this absolutely horrific thing that a Labour government shouldn't be doing, because Labour governments are meant to basically hand out money to everyone at all times, and everyone who asked for that money is a deserving recipient. So there's a real philosophical kind of problem there. And you could see her trying to grapple with it in her speech yesterday. You know, a lot of the words she was using, you know, the emphasis on working people and all the rest, it could have come sort of straight out of a kind of very, like if ChatGPT was running a filter of Margaret Thatcher, that was a kind of very poor copy of Margaret Thatcher, the kind of phraseology that might come from her, where you're talking about hard-working families and, you know, they shouldn't be having to pay for people who are slacking off, and also, you know, the wealthy should be paying their share. But, anyway, the other problem is that also there were so many magic wand items there, and I know that the OBR's marked it and they're happy with it, but you had the tax avoidance crackdown, so that's
this was really interesting.
Yeah.
Pay your taxes, everybody, because it's going to cost you a lot more, isn't it? The rates on late payment have gone up 2% to 3% and 10% extra if you're 31 days late. Pay those bills. Yeah.
And also, I mean, it's a big crackdown on people promoting dodgy tax avoidance schemes, which I'm all in favour of that. But the point is you're trying to get more money, you're squeezing more money out of the tax avoidance lemon. You are squeezing more money out of the kid on, we're going to make the public sector more productive. Nowadays, it's not IT, it's AI that's going to do that. And all these kind of little areas where there's somehow something's going to magically happen that's going to make stuff better. Yeah. And really what we need to do is grapple with just drastically reshaping the system and changing and clarifying the incentive structure. Because that has become so clogged up with regulatory and sort of tax rule plaque, basically. And now, you know, I think that is probably more than anything else, and the energy issue comes into this, that is what's clogging up Britain's arteries, and we need to get rid of it. And it would be much fairer, you know, if people with more money would probably end up paying at least as much tax as they're paying just now. But if you just kind of flatten and simplify the tax system, allow more innovation in the energy sector, and allow people to start, you know, pumping gas, all that sort of stuff, then we could get back to some sort of growth and productivity.
As we've discussed, John, a million times before, you can't create growth, but you can create the conditions for growth with cheap energy, straightforward, simple taxes that aren't too high, reduction in regulation, a solid legal system. I mean, one of the other problems, of course, in the UK is how intensely and constantly litigious we are now. I mean, it used to be a litigious society, now we are. Nothing goes through without that. But of course, there is an answer, John. There's an easy answer to everything. All these complicated things that we've been talking about, all these big philosophical moves that the state needs to make and Rachel needs to get a grip of, etc. They don't really matter. You and I both know what the answer is, don't we? It's a wealth tax. Broader shoulders, pay your fair share, right?
Yes.
Tell us why a wealth tax is absolutely the answer. I can't think of anything better. That'll keep those billionaires in the UK.
I think you're right. The good thing is that it's basically an infinite pot of money from which any amount can be raised.
I heard that too, yeah.
Whatever the gap in your finances is, a wealth tax will fix it.
The rich.
It's an ingenious idea.
Tell us the truth, John. Tell us the truth.
I don't know why no one's thought of it. Okay, well, look, there's the point that you always make, which is we already tax wealth in this country. And wealth in the sense that normal human beings would understand it rather than accountants. So dividend income I would class as wealth because it's unearned income. It's something that comes from an asset you own. Kind of transaction taxes, stamp duty, etc. Inheritance tax is a big obvious one. The capital gains tax, which is now, the annual allowance is £3,000, which is buttons whenever it comes to that, especially whenever capital gains is also charged on price inflation, basically. So we already tax wealth. And then if you're going to turn around and say, well, okay, we're going to charge you 1% on everything you own, your net assets, or 2%, even as some people keep talking about, and saying it's going to raise $24 billion a year, I just don't think that's correct, because for a start, your compliance is going to be a nightmare. Mm-hmm. How do you value people's assets? And what do you do whenever they go down? Do they get a rebate? And also, people will leave.
And also, crucially, how do you value private companies? So I'm an entrepreneur. I started a company. I've got a company. It's loss-making, but it's growing fast. So in private equity terms, it's worth 50 million quid. But it's unsaleable. Yes. I can't sell a stake in it. There's no way to get any money out of it. You're going to charge me 2% a year. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm moving somewhere else. I'm not staying.
Yeah, absolutely. And people will.
Because I can't afford it. I haven't got the cash. I'm not going to do it. And you might say, we'll roll it up. We'll roll it up for you with the Treasury's idea of what an appropriate interest rate is. We'll roll that up. And then what happens? Maybe my company doesn't work out. And suddenly in 10 years, it's worth 2 million quid or 1 million quid or absolutely nothing. Do I still owe you the money? How does this work? I mean, it's nonsensical. I mean, there's a reason why basically nowhere has a wealth tax anymore. Lots of people have tried wealth taxes. We offer you France, for example, and they all backtrack it from not only does it not raise any money, but the admin is intense, is awful. And people leave. They just go.
The one thing that I think but even then, I just don't see them doing this, because it would be people would get annoyed because it's about property. If you were to get rid of the council tax and kind of reform council tax and replace it with some sort of annual wealth tax, then that would be, annual property tax, basically. I can see how that would be doable. I mean, obviously it would be extremely unpopular. And also it wouldn't fall on the shoulders of the people that are normally considered to be kind of wealthy by people who want a wealth tax. It would basically be anyone that owned the property and anyone that rented the property indirectly. So again, I just don't think that's a nettle that any government would want to grasp, given the position of residential property in this country.
Another wealth tax I've just thought of, by the way, double council tax on holiday homes.
Yeah, aye.
That's a wealth tax. Send us in, anybody, if you can think of a wealth tax that John and I haven't thought of yet, please send it in. And there was the extra tax on expensive cars. That's a wealth tax.
Extra tax on expensive cars. Somebody was also talking about insurance premium duty as well, which I thought was an interesting one. You're talking about, well, if you're having to insure an expensive asset, then, it's proportional, I think. So, you're having to pay that.
We better bring this to an end, but I think that the key thing to say is that John and I have been, we've been giggling about a wealth tax. We think it's kind of funny that any government could be stupid enough to introduce something like this. But one thing this government has proven so far, they're really, really stupid about this stuff. They don't understand incentives. They appear to actively refuse to understand incentives, which is a big problem when it comes to running an economy. The key thing is that we now have no idea what's going to happen in the next budget. We know that Rachel Reeves is in trouble. We know that a headroom, the stupid headroom, is constantly coming and going and coming and going. More going than coming. We know that the economy has slowed down dramatically since her first budget. We know that the NI thresholds, etc., are having a horrible effect on businesses, particularly in the hospitality business. So we do know that there is a very strong possibility that we will see new taxes in her next actual budget. And that means that the next 6 months are extremely uncertain and difficult. And uncertainty, as we know, makes everything to do with economies worse. So, poor Rachel, no?
Poor Rachel indeed. And poor us.
Well, more to the point. Thanks for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Money debrief. If you like our show, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to follow me and John on X or Twitter at MerrynSW and John_Stepek. This episode was produced by Sam Asadi, production, support and sound designed by Moses Andam. Our executive producer is Brendan Francis Newnham. Questions or comments on this show and all our shows are always welcome. Our show email is merrynmoney@bloomberg.net. So do get in touch if you have any ideas for Rachel Reeves that we could explore on the show. She'll appreciate it.